Well, good morning, everyone. We're here for the AWP webinar series, and today we're going to be speaking with the AWP implementation experts. Steve, I'm having trouble getting this. 1 second, please. I seem to be having trouble with the slide advance, Steve.
Okay, 1 moment.
Is this slide 2?
Yes, we're on slide 2, Lloyd.
Perfect. So I'm Lloyd Rankin. I'm the president of Group ASI, and you'll be seeing a lot of me if you get to the conference this year. We are a company that focuses on global AWP and WFP implementation. We're really fortunate today to have a number of great companies speaking.
Seem to have lost your audio, Lloyd. Are you still with us? Okay, well, Lloyd's, I think, having some technical issues over there, so I'll just pick up where he left off. Lloyd is the president of Group ASI. Group ASI is the organizer and owner of the annual Advanced Work Packaging Conference, which has been going since 2009, originally Construction Owners Association of Alberta Conference, and known as the Workplace Planning Conference. We expanded the conference to include Advanced Work Packaging, which was introduced as a Construction Industry Institute best practice in 2013. So coming back to Houston this year, and we're lucky to have the support of a lot of great sponsors that are AWP implementation experts. And among that group, Fluor, Zachary, and Amec Foster Wheeler are going to be delivering presentations at the conference. We also have support from ExxonMobil, KBR, Jacobs, and JV Driver projects. Jacobs, JV Driver, and KBR were unable to attend the webinar this morning due to resource constraints. I believe the individuals that were going to be presenting were pulled away on various projects. As you know, it can be a very busy time this time of year in the industry, so just heading back to who we have online today, we're going to be hearing from Fluor, Zachary Group, and Amec Foster Wheeler, who you'll also be hearing from at the conference. So just to kind of set the tone for the webinar here, you're going to be hearing from the industry-leading AWP implementers that we just mentioned. They're going to be sharing some insights and some of their experiences around ways that they plan and execute advanced work packaging systems on projects. As a sort of a primary question, so sort of a common thread for the presentation, we're going to be asking the presenters, what is your company's approach to AWP implementation? The format's going to be pretty straightforward. Some of you may have been on our previous webinars in the series, but basically the panelists will introduce themselves and their companies. They'll respond to that question and then give you a short preview of what to expect in their breakout session. We're going to be moving to a Q&A after that, and you'll be able to submit questions through the questions pane in the webinar control panel that you see on screen. So I'm going to move it ahead here to Dale from Fluor. Just going to send you the controls, Dale, and you can go ahead and speak to us.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Good morning. My name is Dale Adcox, and I am the U.S. East Region Manager for Fluor AWP Implementation. Fluor is a global construction EPC fabrication firm that's been in the industry for over 100 years. We are currently have offices in over 50-something countries and roughly about 50,000 employees. What I want to talk about today is really the experience in our AWP implementation. All of my experience is centered around AWP implementation, creating value through all phases of the life cycle, project life cycle. Adding value really is through productivity improvements, beginning with engineering. A lot of times when we talk about productivity, we're always centered around the craft and the productivity in the field, but with AWP implementation, you begin to gain productivity improvements from engineering all the way through to construction turnover or turnover of the project. You've probably heard a lot of companies talking about AWP since Advanced Work Packaging was termed a best practice in 2015 by the CII Research Team 319. You know, in the last few years, there's been a lot of people talking about AWP implementation, AWP process, what is the definition of AWP, different work packaging philosophies. But you don't hear a lot of companies talking specifically about how they implement the AWP program. And that's what I want to touch on briefly today, is just want to concentrate on Fluor's global AWP implementation. And Fluor they believe in the AWP process. They have created an AWP organization within Fluor, comprising of central managers, if you will, central U.S., an East Region Manager, a Central Region Manager, Asia Pacific Region Manager, and also a Canada Region Manager reporting to a Global Director. Why this is important is because we have truly structured a foundation to implement AWP. And I'll go in more in detail in all of this at the breakout session that is scheduled for October the 11th at 9 o'clock in the morning during the AWP conference. We believe that our process, within the Fluor AWP process, we have identified 4 targets for a global implementation success, getting away from a project-to-project implementation. Why is that important? Because historically, when we talk about any type of AWP implementation, it's really been based on a project. Well, the issue is you can't get consistency by looking at it from a project-to-project standpoint. You really need to look at it from a global perspective, and that's what we're doing here. So we've concentrated on creating a standardized procedure. Something, you know, what we consider to be our 4 targets are a standardized procedure, that it is repetitive, the process is repetitive, it's consistent, and it's results oriented. Creating a standardized procedure develops unity within the engineering, procurement, fabrication, construction teams. And that's very important because we need to understand where we're going to start implementation of the AWP process. Okay, it's not in one phase, it's really in all phases. But depending on how the contracting structure is, we may need to set up only for engineering, but we need to plan for where we will be at the next phase of the project going into procurement or construction or fabrication sequence. And a clear understanding of expectations drives projects to set up AWP correctly and at the beginning based on those contract phases. Fluor has created a team of AWP experts that can produce repetitive and consistent deliverables created by a process that is results-oriented, is what I'm talking about here. And that's really what's important, is if we have, through our director, Savannah Laura, we have formed an organization that is really concentrating on a global outreach, if you will, not something that's based specifically on a project. So we're able to utilize this team of experts and then take that knowledge and pass it down individually to a project team but understanding and creating value there where we hold people accountable and responsible for the AWP implementation. And so setting up for Fluor's goal for a global implementation success. Steve, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we believe that there's 3 criteria to successfully reach our 4 targets, and those are people, process, and technology. Identifying and recruiting talent is first and foremost, and we've already begun to do that and structure it for a global outreach. Matching these individuals with our processes, supported by technology, gives Fluor the ability to lead in the implementation of AWP. I will go into a lot more detail on each of these criteria during the AWP breakout session. But when we look at people, we look inside our organization, how can we train, mentor, and coach those individuals to have a career in AWP? And that's really what we're looking for now. Not just project specific, but an overall career in the AWP process, from a work phase planner to a work phase planner lead to an AWP manager, and then ultimately an AWP region manager or director. And teaming that with our processes that we have in place to implement AWP based off of a global practice, and then individually on a project execution plan to support that global practice, and ultimately matching that with technology to support all steps of the AWP process, beginning in engineering. What engineering tools do we utilize? What advanced work packaging or packaging tools do we utilize, and ultimately where do we end that up in turnover? And so understanding that AWP is not really, it doesn't end with each phase of a project. It actually starts in conceptual design and carries all the way through to turnover to the client, and making sure that we manage each step of that. So next slide, Steve. So thank you for listening to the webinar today. Please attend the meeting we'll have on October the 11th, our breakout session, 9 to 10 a.m., where I'll go into more detail on our implementation plan, how we currently do that, what our organization looks like, and the technology that we currently use, and why we utilize that implementation. We also would like to invite you to our plenary session. We have on October the 11th. It's a 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock session, Cutting Through the Bull, Part 1, and that's where you'll hear from Sylvana Lara, our Director of AWP, and Brian Vogel from Dow. Once again, I'm Dale Adcox, U.S. East Region Manager, supporting AWP implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. We're going to move on to our next presenter. We've got Decker Barnard representing Zachary Group, and I'm going to make Decker the presenter.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I'd like to thank everybody to give me an opportunity to talk a little bit about Zachary's AWP package, process and implementation. I'm part of a 4-person group that our company has created to ensure this implementation across our projects throughout the country. Go to the next slide.
There we go.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Steve. To talk a little bit about work package, Zachary's been work packaging on the construction side for quite a while. And while we find on the construction side there's a lot of things that drive that process to be successful, and what we usually find on our projects is that we get the spotlight towards the end of the job, the turnover, where we're measuring the details down to how many loops have you shot, linear feet of pipe you've hydroed restored, terminations, flanges, torques. And when we look at this process overall, our goal is to drive that spotlight to each phase of the job. So not only on construction, but early on in the feed through engineering, procurement, material management, construction, and then through turnover. So we want transparency throughout the project. We want to make sure there's structure so everybody knows what they're responsible for. again, driving that spotlight on who's responsible for that. Our CEO, John Zachary, is really high on getting predictability on these jobs. It's not acceptable to be 80% on a project and then that project turns into just a big loser because of inefficiencies, punch list items, things like that. So getting quality involved in this process is also very important. Measurability, we all know what gets measured gets done. So driving those metrics, making sure everybody knows what they need to be measured on. And then the foremost thing is making sure people are accountable for their process and owning what they need to do in this AWP process. I'm going to try to go to the next slide, Steve. So what we've created is we have a procedure, and we use we call it our standing operating procedure, and it's focused on training all the right parties in the EPC arena, making sure they have all the templates and tools. So we have workshops that are available, and we've so far developed about 20 workshops that we work through with the EPC team. And our goal is to gain this alignment up front, so everybody, again, knows what they're responsible, agrees on the path of construction, because one of the biggest hindrances we find in this process is when we change that path of construction later on, because it has such a downstream ripple effect against procurement and engineering, that it's so important to hold that process and make sure everybody's aligned on it. And it's okay to change it, but the whole team needs to be aligned on why we change it. Also very important is contract language around AWP, making sure our suppliers and our vendors are held accountable for supplying the CWPs, the material for the CWPs and we have actually several different work packages we're developing, and engineering also getting the vendor data for that. So our expediters can perform, our buyers can perform, and everybody can support the process. Metrics, again, very, very important around EWPs, CWPs, making sure we're finishing on time, that we are supporting the plan, and then just consistency across our job. So we're rolling this out throughout the company. We have 3 projects being implemented right now, and all of our proposals in-house that we're going through are implementing this process. Next slide. We have a breakout session on October 10th where we'll go into a lot more detail on our process, all the different steps we take, some of the templates we use, especially around material management, because that just seems to be a gap in the industry on making sure everything's packaged and ready to go per CWP. So a lot of good stuff. I hope you guys join us. Again, my name is Decker Barnard. I'm with a group of 4. We're titled as a seeing you guys there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Decker. First, before I'll just mention that Lloyd Rankin, our moderator, seems to be back online. So hopefully we don't have any further technical issues in that regard. Thanks everyone for their patience. Moving on to our next presenter, Dan Canning from Amick Foster Wheeler. And Dan, I'll send you the controls in 1 moment.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Dan Canning. I'm the VP of Construction and Commissioning for Amick Foster Wheeler Oil and Gas Chemicals in Canada. A wide variety of experience over the last 40 years in both onshore, offshore projects in a number of industries. And I'm the subject matter expert here for Amick Foster Wheeler, both in the integrated project delivery model, and another best practice that we deliver is connected excellence, and I'm also providing corporate governance for the AWP process. Next slide, Steve. A little bit about our company, Amick Foster Wheeler. We're an EPC company delivering and maintaining strategic complex assets for a variety of customers globally in a number of energy and related sectors. We offer full life cycle services, both offshore and onshore, oil, gas, chemicals, conventional, unconventional, and we basically are a major proponent of connected excellence and advanced work package planning. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as my co-panel have already stated, there's many aspects to how we actually look at projects, and advanced work packaging is just one of them. And I'd like to share with you that at AMEC Foster Wheeler, we have a very long history of planning work at a very detailed level, although it hasn't been called AWP. AWP is a fairly recent terminology that's been promoted and adopted by CO and CEI. And as I said by Dale earlier, I think the actual terminology of the advanced work package planning has really only come to the fore recently, 2015. But many years ago, as a company working on offshore projects, it became very evident that creating a design with little input to constructability or overall project execution often resulted in projects being over budget, late, and regularly safety issues arising. We just had to improve. AMEC Foster Wheeler undertook planning at a more detailed level, and in the early days this was called block logic diagrams and an execution process similar to the model now presented by CO and CEI. And then that approach then developed into a program called CWP Development. And that encompassed design and execution in workable packages and a sequence delivery. But with the development of technology, and as mentioned I think by Dale earlier, when you have the systems, tools, and databases, it became obvious that we could be extremely more effective and evident in how we translate a design to an execution through information and data structure and sharing by all parties. The diagram I'm showing you now, the connected delivery, is giving you a bit of a visualization that we want to build a relationship between the design areas and the construction work areas. We want to then look at those areas in detail, and again, as my co-panelists had said earlier, the earliest we can do that, the better for actually planning a more detailed level as soon as we can. We then look at those areas and then we divide them up into those workable packages, typically by discipline, and then we then look at the sequence of the path of construction, where we then get an order to the work being produced to get that alignment in the schedule, through supply chain, through design, and through execution. And all of that also ties back to eventually system turnover. All of that can be then connected through a connected excellence platform. And in our particular instance, I'm going to describe in detail a little bit about our platform, which is called Convero. Next slide, please. One of the most important things that I think we've all come across in recent times is that we need to have a common environment where we are sharing knowledge, we're sharing information. We're going to look at not just design, we're going to look at the elements of the design. Do we need prefabrication? Do we need modularization? We're going to look at the logistics. We're going to look at the supply chain. When are we buying material? Who are we buying it from? Can we buy in bulk? Can we then buy by packs? We're looking at the planning philosophy. How far are we going in the planning? Are we just planning engineering? Or are we going to include an execution plan at the most earliest opportunity? And when we put all of this information together, using the collaboration of systems, tools, and having all parties in that environment, one of the things that's been mentioned to me many times in the past is that if we don't do this level of integrated planning, is that often once we've started execution, whether it be through engineering or whether it actually through the fabrication or modularization or field execution, often the critical paths change. I've got to say, in my experience, when I look back in some of the early days of projects, is that we really weren't monitoring the actual critical paths. And it was obvious that when we got more detail and more structure and looked and had the vision to look more ahead, the critical paths for these projects were more evident and can be managed then through change control to make sure that you do indeed have a safe return and a predictable and reliable project. Next slide, please. So As I stated earlier, it's all about connected excellence, and at the heart of what we have here at Foster Wheeler, we have a system, project management system for us, which is our integrated project management system, Convero. And this allows us to enable all parties in the project to have full alignment from the integrated project delivery process model, AWP being a key building block in that project execution. And recent projects in Alberta, a little bit of background to it, is that where we have not actually employed this very detailed process, that those projects often come and have some issues and problems later on. Dale touched on it earlier about work phase planning. Indeed, there is a slot for that as well. But up front of that, the advanced work package planning is an absolute key element to structure the project and give us a basis, a sound basis for both estimating and then executing the job to that predictable forecast number. And one last important part here is that, and again was touched on with our co-presenters, is that having a collaborative working environment, and then looking at how do we execute to ensure that both any engineering company, supply chain, the builders, the owner have a full understanding and a full alignment in a collaborative manner from an execution point of view. Even when we look at some historical evidence from the UK 25, 30 years ago, where the industry had to really reinvent itself, and it was obvious from analysis of that work that having a more collaborative contracting situation where we're really looking beyond short-term projects, often adversarial from the contract nature, into a more long-lasting, longer-term relationship is another key element to have all of this harnessed into a far more effective execution model and a safer outcome. Last slide, please. So thank you for the time spent today. My name again is Dan Canning. I represent AMEC Foster Wheeler, and I look forward to presenting at the AWP conference on the 11th of October, and look forward to discussing in far more detail how we actually deliver to a more predictable outcome. Look forward to meeting you on the 11th of October. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. So I'm going to throw it back to Lloyd now to discuss some of the other topics that you'll be seeing in the implementers track.
Great, thanks, Steve. Something I'm pretty excited about, the Construction Owners Association of Alberta have set up a special initiative to look at applying AWP principles to projects under 100 million. I'm chairing that committee, and I've got a steering committee with 4 other co-chairs. We have probably 40+ people involved in this particular initiative from all of the major EPC, EC, and owner companies that you could probably think of. If you come to the session, you'll get a chance to see the work that we've been doing over the past number of months and the direction that we're going with the model. We're looking for input and feedback, but that 25 to 30% improvement that we've been able to see on mega projects, we believe can be achieved in smaller projects as well, and that's what that model is all about. Steve, could you move me forward one slide? Also, I apologize, I missed the beginning of the session, but Jacobs was not able to speak today, but they will be at the conference. As you can imagine, Harvey has thrown a couple of challenges everyone's way, but Jacobs will be at the conference, and they will be speaking from 3:30 to 4:30 on their approach to AWP implementation. And I think that should be a session. One other thing, I don't know if Steve's mentioned it or not, but a couple of our sponsors won't be speaking at the conference, and I'm thinking of KBR and JB Driver, but they will be attending the conference, and you'll have an opportunity to talk to them at the event. So again, I would fully take advantage of that if I were you. We now have an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So Steve, could you see which questions have come in and ask them to the panelists?
Yeah, for sure. So if there's anyone in the audience that would like to either submit a question in text format or use the raise hand feature, we can let you speak directly to the panelists. Maybe the first question I'll put out there is, many EPCs use high-value engineering centers outside of the country. How are they managed in your AWP program? Maybe we'll get Dale to address that one first.
Sure, I think that's an excellent question, and you're right. We are trying to do more of the high-value engineering away from the U.S., if you will, and in other parts of the country. The way we currently address that is we go to that high-value engineering center and provide an AWP training, a 40-hour training for that particular center, and then we make sure that we follow up on that with internal visits, and then also with having an AW person established at that particular high-value center. I think that's an excellent question, and that is something that we need to continually address as we continue to look at more opportunities to utilize this type of program.
Okay, great. Dan, did you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, and I think that ties in nicely with one of the slides that I had presented. So that common environment that I was talking about, so the systems, the tools, the process is all in one available collaborative model. Anything that we do in our high value engineering centers is visible to our team, whatever they may be. It is actually very conducive for having a multi-project location execution, still with the one common aspect. And if we take AWP as that particular aspect of it, AWP, we would have, and as Dale said, we would have leads in those locations, whether it be a high-value engineering center or another engineering center, but the end product is actually all in one common structured database.
Great, thank you. Dicker.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Great question. You know, very similar to what Dale said and Dan echoed is we also think AWP as a whole, everybody has to be aligned. So when we deal with our high-valued engineering centers, we also assign an AWP champion. We'll go perform training, make sure everybody's aligned and understands what their end goal is, what they're supposed to be doing, and that champion's role overall is to make sure that the process is implemented. If things come up or problems, we'll travel there, we'll continue to monitor, and it's really about each party being held accountable all throughout the process of engineering through procurement to construction. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you. Next question. Engineering work packages are required to build construction work packages. How do you progress and forecast EWP production? Specifically, how do you address the issue of vendor documentation? And maybe we'll go with Decker first this time around.
So great question. We actually had a meeting with some of our engineering design leads a couple months ago, and the main thing that came out is we can do EWPs, but the main thing that affects us is vendor data. So we've since broken out some vendor data also into what we call vendor work packages that we monitor separately to the EWP. It's all held down in the sequence of the schedule, but that's what drives our engineering work packages in order to meet our construction work packages. We also develop a detailed table of contents for each engineering work package so we know exactly what the deliverables are in that and also what's driving those deliverables from a vendor standpoint. It's critical for the engineers to be successful that they have all that data up front so they can meet their dates and then construction can start.
Great. Dan.
Yeah, similar to what's just been said is that, and again, not maybe talking too much detail, but when engineering actually then plan a project, they have to use an AWP process. They have to understand the design areas, the effort, the deliverables, when they want to do the 30%, 60% model reviews. Will they be working in design areas? They have to tie back to the P&IDs being IFC, etc. And one of the other constraints is vendor data. So when we condense all that down into a logical plan for engineering, the construction guys will then come across and look at the packages of work where we actually have a similar deliverable, which is the plot plan. The plot plan is then divided into construction work areas, and then we build a relationship between that construction work area, the CWPs, and the relation back to the EWPs. The EWPs will have the constraint management on their engineering effort, what disciplines are going to be involved, the processes that they will follow, and the tie back to any vendor data. So all of those constraints and dependencies are all built into the plan, such that we have engineering, EWPs, CWPs, supply chain, including vendor data, all logically linked and already in a managed, controlled environment.
Thank you, Dan. Dale.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question, and I appreciate whoever asked it. Within Fluor, we consider to be one of our values, if we are doing an engineering, procurement, construction, fabrication project, we actually do not utilize an EWP. We roll that all into a CWP, as that is our ultimate deliverable, and a CWP is comprised of an EWP. In an engineering only or an engineering procurement phase of the project in utilizing EWPs, we understand exactly what the deliverables are for that EWP. We set that up in a conceptual package, if you will, a virtual package, and then being able to track that. The question about the vendor drawings, I think is a wonderful question, and that's great that somebody had the forethought to ask that. What we have to do on a vendor drawings that may be late is we don't have the ability sometimes to wait on deliverance of that EWP. So we look at that an EWP on an individual basis to see if the vendor deliverables for that particular EWP affect construction. If they affect construction, then we may have to draw a line in the sand to have a completion of that EWP and then add that data at a later date. Okay, if it does not affect construction, then we would finalize that EWP and issue it forward to create a CWP. Great question. Thank you very much for asking it.
Thanks for the replies. Next question. Decker, you mentioned a gap with material management in AWP. Can we talk about what those gaps are and how the panelists see ways to overcome those? And maybe we'll start with Decker again, just because you were addressed directly.
Absolutely, great question. What we find in the dichotomy of how we do the work on the EPC is engineering usually designs by a system, procurement buys by a commodity, construction works by area, and then we design back by system. So in order to make sure the material arrives by area, you have to focus very intently on what exactly is needed in that CWP, make sure that procurement is aligned on what those deliverables are, and it may be 700 ISOs have to be released, and we only need 100 ISOs for that area. So it's designing those, making sure that the fabrication shop's online, the buyer knows what to release in time to support that CWP. So we really focus on breaking that down, making sure materials very detailed out to a CWP, and that the procurement manager is aligned on what they need to provide in time, and also communicating with engineering so they provide the drawings for that so that we can support that team. So we focus on the whole aspect of engineering having to design by system, but breaking those procurement releases down in order to support our construction plan. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel.
Yeah, sure. To echo what Decker has just said, that our database or our project management control system, Convero, going back to what Decker had stated, once we have an idea of the contents of the engineering packages, the relationship back to the CWPs, we then go to the lower level, level 4. We have every individual engineering deliverable now tagged to EWPs and CWPs. The material also, whether it's directly from the model or an estimate for that material or a tagged item, that's also tied and connected to the EWP and the CWP and the individual deliverables. But then there's also an element where we have to understand as soon as we can what's the strategy for bulk buying. So at some point in the life of the project, it's a good opportunity to bulk buy material, and through our system we're able to look at that bulk purchase agreement, look at the available material and look ahead and plan for, do we have enough material or is there any shortfall in that material, and then we would top up or top down accordingly. And we have a process which is dynamic allocation, such that when we're watching an EWP and CWP develop, we can forecast that all of that material will be available for the due date for that package of work going to the field. If it's not going to be available, we'll then expedite that material or we'll do something, but we have a forecast for all aspects that such that the CWP, with all of the engineering information and all of the hard allocated material, is indeed available to build that particular piece of the work.
Great. Dale.
Yeah, no, so material allocation, and when you talk about all of the material, you really need to look at it in phases. And so within Fluor, we do that within a status visualization. So we look at it from if we're utilizing EWPs, we look at it from an EWP perspective. Once those tagged items are associated with that EWP, what is the status of that material? What is the ETA dates? Once it is created into a CWP, and we do further delineation of material, if you will, something that may not be on an ISO or on a steel drawing, then we would do the takeoffs for that. What we might consider to be as bulk buys, and how we bulk buy by area, and then allocate that based off of our CWP package. But it's critical within the phases of the project to understand the status of those materials throughout, whether they've been requisitioned, whether they've been placed on a PO, and then ultimately if they've been received on site. And then also seeing that at the vendor location, making sure that that material is being sequenced accordingly. And that's really the key when we talk about all of the AWP material process. It's really is validating that we are issuing drawings and buying material based off the sequence that we wanted to do that, or based off of our path of construction.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We have another question. It's kind of a two-part question. I'll just read both parts together as they kind of flow together, and you know, if you need more clarification, maybe we can ask the person who submitted it. Would the panel agree that there are a lot of similarities between advanced work packaging and building information modeling, AWP and BIM, that has been accepted and implemented in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, AEC? Second part is BIM seems to have more focus on automation than AWP. Is this because AWP hasn't yet developed as far as BIM? Maybe this time we'll start with Dan.
Vim, I'm not exactly sure what that system does, but certainly visualization is a really important part of how we imagine and view how the plant will be built. Getting back to something that was stated earlier, is that the phases of the project is really important, because when we get through 30, 60, 90% model reviews, we often then can look at the model and break that down into specific areas who go through a 30, 60, 90% model review. And if you're familiar with engineering, we really can't release engineering deliverables to go and build something unless it's went through its 90% model review. So when we have these intelligent tools, they can add a layer of visual aspect to allow us to imagine and even sequence and simulate a build sequence within the model. But that we have to do that through time, because we have a conceptual model and then we will update that as the maturity of the design goes forward. So we have to look at it in a very structured order for the path of construction, and then tying it back to the regulatory 30, 60, 90% model review to allow us to release those pieces of work, which is replicated in the 3D model. But remember, not everything is in the model. So when we talk about an architectural firm, not everything that we build in the oil and gas industry is actually in that model.
Great. Dale, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And when we talk about BIM, we're really talking about basic information modeling. And from an architectural standpoint, y'all have excelled above where we are in the construction industry on the industrial side, because you've already taken the aspects of that information and creating those in your engineering models. That's really the biggest difference between where we are currently in AWP and BIM. Is AWP is not, it's a process. It's not based off a particular model. It's not based off of, it's really more about information and how we structure and organize that information. So as Dan said a minute ago, we talked, really what we put in a model. I think AWP is driving to match some of the creation that BIM has, as far as getting engineers to put more information centered around electrical, centered around concrete, foundations, structural steel, and even piping, all of that information, so we are able to create a virtual work package and move forward that. I think we've got some work to do, but as far as AWP to BIM, AWP is a process, and we are continuing to develop that process so we get more information in our model, so we're able to work package more information. Thank you.
Thank you. And Decker?
So I agree with our other two panelists here. AWP is completely a process. I think technology is going to be a huge part of that process as we continue to grow and mature in the AWP process in the industry. A lot of different companies out there offering, the BIM model and how you can do that and relate that to work packaging and tying attributes. And I think it's something we grow further into, and we'll work through the discrepancies in it and focus on how does it best support the process. But like Dan said earlier, there's not everything in the model that we're going to install out there. So how do we cover that ground? How do we develop that into the process? So I think there's similarities, absolutely. Are we there yet? Not quite, but it is going to help, and it's going to improve our processes in the future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We've still got about 10 minutes left. We've got some more questions. They're a little higher level, a little less in depth than that last one. Let's just start with what do you think are the most important activities for a successful AWP implementation? And maybe let's go with Dan again, if that's all right, Dan.
Yeah, I think, and again to echo what was said earlier, is that if you're dealing with a project and a client who hasn't been exposed to the AWP or the full integrated project delivery model, then you would have to create an implementation plan for that particular project, and I would suggest an engagement plan with the owner's team such that they fully appreciate and understand what has to be done to have that environment such that we're all sharing information and knowledge, and that we are planning to a far more detailed level far earlier than has been done previously, and that front-end loading is actually an advantage and not really a cost per se. It's something that will give us a far more predictable outcome in the long run, and it will gain full alignment with all parties as the earliest possible period.
Thank you. Deckard?
Yeah, the two main things for me are training, making sure everybody understands what the AWP process is, and then that early alignment. Just like Dan said, getting the owners involved, getting the engineers, the EPC, everybody up in line, understanding what the path of construction is, and then documenting that in the schedule or some type of realistic goal. It's really so important that everybody's aligned up front, so you don't have engineering going one direction and construction going another, and procurement going another. Alignment is just so crucial.
Okay, great. And Dale?
Yes, Fluor believes in an AWP implementation on all projects, and so the two critical tasks are, one, identifying the project early enough in conceptual design and understanding what the scope is and what the AWP requirements for that project would be, and then two is training. You know, we believe in an organization of training, mentoring, and coaching when it comes to AWP implementation.
Great. And at the risk of having the panelists repeat themselves, I think this next question is a natural extension to what you just answered, but it says AWP is impacting the front end. How are engineering and procurement changing with this new approach? And Dale, did you want to carry on with that? Oh, unless I think you might be muted, Dale.
Oh, yeah, as a matter of fact, I was. Thank you. So I get asked that question all the time. Is engineers say, "How does that affect me?" Well, my immediate answer is it doesn't affect your process at all. I'm not asking you to do anything different. Really, what I'm asking you to do is structure and organize what we do put together as engineering deliverables. And then from a procurement standpoint, first and foremost is understanding what the time frame is from requisition to PO, okay? And then understanding how we follow that requisition process from a tagged item or a bulk buys to make sure that they are received on site. Great question.
Thank you. Deckard, did you want to take it?
Yeah, you know, excellent question, and we sit here and we ask ourselves, and we've looked at the CII evidence on, you know, 40% procurement, 40% construction, you know, 20% engineering, and where's your major overruns? It usually happens in construction. So I think there is some impacts on how engineering is going to have to affect their design and really holding them to that strict budget, because what is 1-2% on engineering that saves 10-20% on construction, and the same with procurement, which is ingrained in them, you know, buy and get the lowest price. It's really got to be kind of a new mentality almost, that we focus on buying to support the construction plan. And we're still going to have to buy bulk commodities, like Dan said, and get those early mill specs out and things like that. But really, I think there probably will be some increased cost up front, but I think that will pay dividends in the back when you get into the construction projects. And I think the data's proven that.
Good stuff. Dan?
Yeah, it's an age-old question, and I've worked in several industries, several countries, and typically if they haven't been involved with AWP planning, that's typically the first question that comes from the engineering group. How will this affect me? And I will absolutely echo what Dale has just said, is that there is rules for engineering. Again, maybe repeat myself a little bit, is that we have to have 30, 60, 90% model reviews. We have to have done HAZOP. We have to have done the P&IDs to an IFC level before we can release deliverables. And it's all about, when the basic engineering is done, it's about the engineering process to then actually deliver the engineering deliverables themselves at an IFC. And what changes is that we want to get the order of those deliverables in a sequence that supports the construction execution plan. And with that comes those deliverables tagged to those procured items, whether they be valves or equipment, We've got all of the constraint management. We understand the bulk buying. We understand that we're buying from a vendor. We understand when those dates are. So all that constraint management is then built into the plan. But generally, the only effort that I have witnessed from an engineering perspective is to make sure that every single engineering deliverable is tagged in the system to its relevant EWP from an engineering perspective, but also tagged to the CWP, but also tagged to the material module, both from a supply chain and an allocation point of view, such that if there is any issues along the way, we can intervene or expedite accordingly. What we don't want, as what was mentioned before, is engineering delivering material or engineering deliverables that are not consistent with how we want to build the facility.
Awesome. Okay, well, we've got about 4 minutes left. I think now's a good time for Lloyd to add some closing thoughts.
Okay, so we have the conference coming up on the 10th and 11th of October, and we have 7 of the world's top EPC and construction companies all either speaking or attending at the conference. So great opportunity to talk to the people that actually build the projects. And then we have a number of the best owner companies that are actively pursuing advanced work packaging. So again, great opportunity to talk to people that are actually doing this and get a sense of what some of the challenges are and how to ease the implementation process. You will see on the control panel that there's something called AWP C17 lookbook. That is a package that we've put together that gives you a detail on what sessions are going to be happening, what the timing is. So we strongly recommend you download that and take a look at it. We're expecting our largest turnout yet at this conference, and I think that the program that we have is the best one that we've come up with so far. Lots of information on what owners are looking for and what needs to be done to actually do this. So I think whether you want to listen or whether you want to network, this is a great opportunity to get information on advanced work packaging. We have both CII and COA represented on what's being done to further develop the models, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the conference. So thank you very much to our speakers, and they just were able to touch on what they're going to be talking about at the conference. You'll be getting a whole bunch more detail if you come. So look forward to seeing you there. If you have any questions, please send us an email. I think that's it. Steve, do you want to end the webinar, please?
Yep, thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.